Okay, we can go ahead and get going. We have quorum here already, so that's good. Welcome to the January 9th meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Costa Mesa Sanitary District. Call this meeting to order at 6:01. This time, roll call. Yep, that's not on here, but let's do roll call.
Tom Brenneman.
Here.
Sue Lester.
Here.
Shane Smith.
Here.
Phil Marsh.
Here.
Monty Fields.
Here.
Tom McElroy.
Here.
I'm sorry, Mike McElroy.
That's right.
I apologize.
Anyway. Yeah.
Jenna Oak. Elodie Katz.
Here.
Andrew Nielsen. Vice Chair Albert Graham Jr. Chair Mike Carey.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'd open it up to public comments, but nobody from the public is here, so we'll bypass that. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our December 12th meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review those and look over those minutes? Any comments, questions, concerns? No? We have a motion. Second? Okay, second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Okay, the draft Board of Directors minutes. That's just to receive and file. So that was from the board meeting on December 20th. I guess that was after our meeting. So since then, there's been a new president appointed, right?
Yes.
President Perry?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ferryman.
Ferryman, right.
Ferryman.
I met with him just today. So, President Ferryman, I apologize. VP? It is, I know. I'm having a hard time pulling them up on mine. Okay. So that's receive and file, and Ms. Schaefer is the secretary, correct? All right.
I had a question, actually, on the minutes, if I may. I just saw that there was some conversation about the CAC and some concern that we haven't been attending the board meetings as much as the directors would like. I just was wondering if anyone could speak to that, if we should have a conversation about that.
Sure. If you recall the committee handbook, it does state in the handbook that committee members should attend at least one board meeting in a year, and I think that was just a concern the board had. That so far, I think we've had been here for six months now. And I think a couple committee members have showed up, but I think they just want to see more of your faces, and that's all. So
that is simple.
But their board meetings are always in the morning, aren't they?
No.
no, they have two board meetings. They have
The study
session is at 9:30. Then they have, which is the second Tuesdays of the month, and every fourth Thursday of the month is at 5:30.
I've actually been to a meeting. I should know that.
Yeah, you're the one that attended, I think. So. Good job, Ms. Lester. Okay, next up on the agenda is the solid waste rate study report. I think Mr. Carroll has a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee, and Happy New Year's to the committee. This is the last time we did a solid waste rate was 15 years ago. So what you have before you is really the first public viewing of a proposed rate increase in our solid waste rates. In fact, in the past 15 years, we actually had two rate decreases, which you don't see a lot or hear a lot. Because it's been 15 years since we've had the last rate increase in our solid waste, if Lonnie, if you can go to that screen about the schedule, we scheduled a very ambitious meeting schedule to ensure that the public has ample time to review the proposed rates and provide comments. And so this is the proposed schedule that staff is recommending. So we started out with tonight. As I mentioned, tonight is the first time these proposed rates will be viewed by the public. And what we're asking for the committee tonight is really, it's just a file and receive. What we're seeking is your feedback, any questions you have for the consultant to come back and maybe revise the rates. It's really more for, right now, it's just information gathering. And then on January 17th, we will mail out notices to all of our customers, to all 24,000 households, to notify them of 2 town hall meetings that we will have here, which, as you see, will be on January 30th and on February 26th. We will also put on that notice is that in case they're not here, tonight's meeting will be recorded. So we'll have a link on that notice to inform the residents that if you can't make it in those meetings, you can at least watch tonight's meeting about the presentations from our consultant. Then after our town hall meeting on 30th, then we'll present it to the board on February 12th. And again, just for their information, they're going to take the information, give us some feedback. We will also, then we'll bring it back to you on February 13th, and that's when we'll share with you the comments that we received so far from the public, if we got any comments we received from the board. And then on February 13th, that's when we will be seeking direction or recommendations from this committee on the proposed rates that you would want to present to the board. So then we'll have another town hall meeting on the 26th for those residents who couldn't make it on the 30th. And then we'll have another study session on the board on March 12th. Again, we will share with them on that the committee's recommendations along with any other comments and suggestions from the public. And then as far as Prop 218, which you'll hear a little more tonight, there's some regulations we have to comply with. We have to notify residents 45 days in advance before the board takes any action on new rates. So we will mail those notices out on April 4th. And then on May 23rd, that's when the board will consider adopting the rates. And if we don't receive a 51% protest, then the rates will be adopted, and then they'll be implemented. There'll be and the next assessments for 2019-20. I also wanted to bring to your attention some handouts you have before you. One of them I wanted to show you is that we made copies of our 2012 Citizens Survey that was done in 2012. We surveyed 1,000 residents in 2012, and this survey was really the catalyst for implementing the organic recycling program. And as you'll see in the study from the consultants, that's really one of the significant factors for the increase is the organic recycling program. So we wanted to share that with you. I think it's really good information on what our residents have told us. It gave us the foresight and the vision of where we wanted to go and where we're heading. And then also included is state recycling mandates, this one sheet. And I want to point to your attention, if you notice in this sheet, there's 1 year that keeps standing out, 2020, that's next year, and all these regulations are going to be implemented. And so the good news is that we're way ahead of the game than many organizations in California. Many cities are waiting for the last minute to implement organics program, which is going to increase their cost. So we are, like I said, we are ahead of the game. As I mentioned, our organic recycling program, I think I mentioned earlier, we are guaranteed the lowest rate because we were the first ones to implement that program. So we are guaranteed the lowest rates, and that's why we did that, because we knew as 2020 comes around, the city's going to be scrambling to find this best practice to comply with these mandates, and costs are going to go up. So we wanted to ensure that we have the best rates for our residents. So that's some background for you. I'm going to turn it over to Nabila. She's going to kind of brief you a little bit on how we selected our consultant, NBS, and then she will introduce our consultant, NBS, and they will come up here and give you a presentation on the study, and then we'll be open up for any questions. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Nabila.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. In May 2018, the Costa Mesa Sanitary District solicited proposals for conducting a solid waste rate and feasibility study. 2 firms responded to our RFP. They were SCS Engineers and NBS Government Finance Group. Both firms demonstrated experience in conducting solid waste rate studies for other agencies. However, NBS had more experience with smaller agencies like CMSD, and they also provided the quickest timeline to get the study done. The district entered into an agreement with NBS in September 2018. Over the last 3 months, the consultant has evaluated the district's current solid waste rates and performed a cost analysis based on the possible tier rate structure where the district would charge rates based on the size carts that the residents have. They have projected annual revenues, and expenses were evaluated as the basis to propose future rates. Greg and Jordan are here today from NBS, and they are here to present their findings. NBS and staff will be available after the presentation to answer any questions the committee may have. So, Greg? Yes.
I'm Greg Klempner with NBS. I'm here to basically go over the results of this study. It's essentially what's in your report that you've read. And I thought I'd ask, does anybody have any general questions ahead of time before we go through the results? So basically what we're going to do is we're going to give you an overview of the study methodology, the specific objectives that we were tasked with looking at, look at the different financial plan alternatives and the rate alternatives. The core of all this is the methodology, the cost of service analysis. So after we review the draft results, then we'll talk about next steps. If you want to ask questions during the presentation, feel free. Otherwise, you can maybe make a note on the page number and what the question was when you come back to it. So the methodology is pretty much the same whether you have a water, sewer, solid waste, or other kind of rates, even electric rates. There's 3 separate steps. The financial plan really looks completely separate from the rates itself. What are your expenses and revenues? What are you getting in current rate revenue? The projected expenses, labor expenses, organics program is clearly a big one. As a result of that, you're running into some deficits, which has to be fixed. So that really defines, once you take the non-rate revenue and subtract it from the rate revenue, you take the expenses and subtract the non-rate revenue, you know how much you need to collect from rates themselves, because you have other sources of revenue that don't come through rates. Once you define that, the cost of service really looks at, given that we've got this number, how do we collect that from customers? In this case, it's not a real complicated thing. You've basically got all residential customers. You have additional carts. We did look at breaking down the costs for the different cart sizes. As it turned out, that wasn't going to be something that could be implemented. I was hoping that it would be, because I think it's actually more fair. And generally, people like to have an option, particularly if it's going to save them money. So that was something we were hoping was going to happen. So the cost service analysis basically allocates those costs out to the different types of customers. So we had actually allocated everything to the 35, 65, and 90-gallon containers and the additional containers if somebody asked for an additional one. There are, so once you do that, how you collect them from each of those customers is all rate design. In this case, given that the 3 cart sizes was kind of eliminated as an option in the end, at least we got the rates. And if you want to look at them later, we can always go back to that. If your billing system at some point has the capability to do that. So I'll say that some of the challenges, these studies, ideally, when we present this, it's going to be, okay, well, A plus B equals C. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. And it's a very simple process. The methodology itself is very straightforward, and there are a lot of things that you face along the way that, challenges that you could have questions about. How do we allocate these costs? Where do we get this data? Some of the challenges we had, Nabil can sympathize with me, but there was a lot of questions about how many, like we asked, well, how many containers do you have? How many 30, 35, 65, and 90-gallon containers? And because people can have 2 each, and then 2 recycling materials, yard waste containers, there's a big question. Well, we're not sure how many containers we actually have, and how many people have 1 of 35 or 65 or 90 or 2. So those were some challenging things. And some of the costs get allocated by container and by container size, and then some get allocated by accounts. So that was one of the challenges, figuring out how many containers we had. We know how many accounts you have. That's pretty straightforward. You'd think, and this is probably the 4th or 5th study that I've done, breaking it down by container size. And you'd think that most of these communities have a pretty good idea of 35-gallon containers. Of those people you pick up, how much waste is in those compared to a 65, compared to a 90? And I checked back with some of our other clients, and they really said, I don't know. It was kind of odd. We were hoping to get good data from other communities so we could, even though we're not going to recommend the separate container sizes, how much do you actually collect? I mean, that would be an interesting thing to know aside from the rates. How much do people put in 35-gallon containers versus 65 versus 90? And, there's really not a lot of good data about that. So, we did some allocation factors considering that. Let's see. Looking at the budget line items, always the question is, when we have to break down costs by function, it's collection, disposal, overhead, admin, so forth, which line items are used for what? And it turned out that's pretty straightforward. The biggest categories were very clear as to what they were being used for. Let's see. There's a lot of allocation factors that we had to come up with. How do you allocate costs for the additional container? So you've already got an account. The truck's driving by. He's already picking up here 1 or 2 other containers, and then he's picking up another one. So what collection cost is there? The guy's already there. It's just, how do you account for that? So let's go through the alternatives. First of all, on the financial side, as we said, that's kind of a separate component. Just dealing with the budget numbers. Forget about rates. So in terms of fixing the deficit, the annual deficit that there is occurring, if you don't do something, you're going to run down your reserves and you're going to go negative. So obviously there has to be some rate increases. So we started with the idea that we'd like to fix that deficit in 2 years. So that was option 1. I think once we looked at the rates, it's like, we're not sure we want to do that. What are some other ways to look at that? So these options 2 and 3, and option 2 is the one that we're recommending, looked at how to fix the deficits over a long period, 5 years. So we looked at, well, what if we did most of the rate increase up front versus what would it be if we just adopted a certain percent every year? 8.36% every year will do it. The 9, 9, 9, and 6, 6, for some reasons is maybe preferable. These are kind of things that are somewhat subjective. You can look at the results and go, I like that one better. The option 2 is kind of the one we've settled on. So as we said, the rate alternatives. So these are financial plan alternatives. The rate alternatives are either continue with the flat rate that you have now. It's very simple, pretty straightforward, or you do it by the cart size. So we actually have results for the cart sizes. So the recommendations, we said, the 99966, that's what we're going to be recommending based on conversations with staff. And continue with the flat rate structure. So everybody gets the same regardless of the cart size. So this 99966 results in cumulative rate increases of 45%, 45.5% over 5 years. May seem a lot. It is a lot. But when you look at inflation, if inflation is 3% a year, it's not that bad. From my perspective, it's easy for me to say that, but I'm getting all the same rate increases that you guys are getting. So anyway, that's what we have. If you guys have some input, like, hey, let's just spend down the reserves, whatever, feel free. Oops. Okay, so when you're communicating with the public, sometimes graphics are a good way to do it. It's an easy way to just get the general picture of what's going on here. So as you can see from this, the blue bars represent your annual costs. The black line is that's the rate revenue you're getting. So obviously you're not covering your costs, and those over time, without any rate increases, those costs are going to get more and more above the amount of revenue. Your deficits are going to grow. You're going to expend all your reserves. So the green line is if you adopt the recommended rate increases, the 99966. That's where your revenue gets. So obviously you're still going to have a deficit for a couple of years, but it's getting smaller, and eventually you start getting a surplus. So one of the good things about the financial health of the district is you have healthy reserves now, so you have some time to fix this. It's not like we're going broke, and next year we will be looking for money just to keep the doors open. That's not the case here. For people who like tables, like a little bit more detail, this is actually a roll-up. Your budget is quite extensive, so there's a lot of detail items in your budget. So these are the projections where we looked at what's a reasonable rate of inflation for each line item. Obviously, your biggest ones are going to be your contractor costs. So once we looked at that, we did a projection, a forecast. It actually goes out 10 years. But 5-year period for adopting under Prop 218, that's generally what we present as the next 5 years. So the 9%, 66 is results in, if you look at the third line up from the bottom, the annual surplus deficit with the rate increases. So you can see you have pretty large deficits right now, but that goes away and becomes a surplus over the period of these rate increases. And then the cumulative rate increases, they're shown at the bottom. So here's what happens to your reserves. I think your existing reserve target is $2 million. Yeah. So it's $2 million. For the purposes of this, there's a lot of reasons, particularly when you collect rates through taxes. The inflow. A lot of utilities, they get monthly revenue. So when you're getting it on a monthly basis, that's a lot different than getting it whenever the taxes are collected and they sent to you, typically twice a year. So because of that, it makes sense to hold a little bit more in reserves. So about 2.6 is what it comes out to, about 50% of the annual operating reserves. Depending on the utility and the type of cash flows they have, these targets get adjusted. Industry standards kind of depend on how you operate the utility. And in your case, in any utility that gets property tax revenue-based fees, you're not going to get it this often. So you have to make sure you have enough cash on hand to make it through the year. So the darker blue bar there is what happens with the rate increases. So you're still drawing down your reserves for a couple of years, and then they start swinging back up until you're basically at the reserve level at the end of the 5-year period. The lighter blue bars are what happens if you don't have rate increases. So as I said, you do have reserves, but those get drawn down, and at some point you will have no reserves. So the results, so the cost of service, this is a kind of a summary, a overview. You know, sometimes people go, well, how do you come up with those rates? You know, and it's in some ways it's very simple. The concept is very simple, and once you get the results, I think you can see that it's pretty understandable. It's pretty straightforward. You can get lost in a lot of the details, so we don't want to get people lost with big tables and, you know, lots of complicated numbers and everything. But here's how it's actually done. So we take the costs, your annual revenue requirement from rates, and then we want to, you know, whatever number that's, $10 million. We need to divide that into functional categories. Functional categories are the types of services that are provided to the customers. So those functional categories are collection, disposal, organics program, and overhead admin. So we take each line item, and you know there's a couple. We have 3 very large budget line items. Those are the most important, but those are also the easiest to allocate to these functions. One's for collection, one's basically processing, disposal. One is specifically the organics program, and then there's a lot of district costs, overhead admin, and that's a much smaller category. So once we allocate those to those 4 types of costs, then we have to look at what service type. Now you could have a separate recycling program and a separate municipal solid waste and separate organics and maybe C&D, maybe commercial. You could have a lot of things, but your costs, your service types are very simple. It's all residential. There is the additional can. So the original intent was to break it down into the 3 cart sizes, and those results are there. So I mean that's fine. But once you take the 3 cart sizes out and stick with a flat rate, it's pretty simple. You just have one service level for the residential customer and the additional cart. So it end up being, you know, once you take those 3 cart sizes out, it's just the additional cart. And I will say that there's enough questions about Prop 218, and as you can tell, anytime the economy gets stressed, we go through a recession or whatever, people are more sensitive to rate increases. And under Prop 218, you know, there's a mechanism to challenge rates. We're seeing a lot more throughout the state of California, a lot more challenges to rates, a lot more lawsuits. That makes people somewhat more careful, I think, as to how they adopt the rates. There used to be a lot of people that it was just back of the envelope, and it's like, well, we've always charged this much, and really no underlying basis for the rate increases. And now, anytime you increase the rates, you are subject to not only the Prop 218 protest ballot, but potential legal challenge. So people want to try to be careful about how they do this. This provides the documentation, the numbers, if anybody wants to see exactly how those rates were calculated. So with the additional cart, you can say, nah, let's round it up to $10, you know, whatever. But you can't just pick a number out of the air. So at least this documents, you know, how all the costs are allocated, how we came up with a cost for additional cart, and basically everything else is recovered through the flat rate for just the normal service. So once we allocate the cost to this additional, all the functional categories, take the functional categories, allocate those out to the types of service, then we take the cost for each of those types of service and divide by either the number of carts or the number of accounts. So as I said, this is pretty simple. I mean, this is like A plus B equals C. I mean, it's really very simple. And we don't want to try to confuse anybody with numbers. But now we're going to go through some of the costs. So those 4 functional categories, here's how we broke down the costs, and trash hauler, recycling disposal, and organics were the 3 big categories. A lot of other stuff went into other O&M or programs. for the detailed budget line items, every one of those we allocated at a certain percent to each of these 4 functional categories. So this is a roll-up of that analysis, and as you see at the very bottom, ultimately this comes out to be 47% for collection. Recycling and disposal was 33, the organics was 13.7, and the rest, overhead admin, is 6.3%. So that's the functional cost allocation. The allocating the functional costs. So now each of those categories, remember, once we identify the collection costs, disposal costs, recycling, and so forth, then you have to allocate those out to the customer service types. So this was actually allocated out to the 3 cart sizes, but basically you have the additional carts and you have the flat rate carts. So here's where we come up with some of these allocation factors. So in terms of the cart size and how much waste people put into when you go by and collect the waste, how fast do you fill up the truck? How often does the truck have to leave to go to dispose at the dumping site, transfer station, to be processed? So there's some of those factors that, but basically the process of going by, collecting the waste, driving, going to the transfer station, picking up the carts, all that's all collection costs. So we just allocated out here. So the adjustment here was that the additional carts, as I mentioned, when you're going by a house and you're already picking up the other carts and you have the additional cart, well, you could say, well, it's actually no additional cost. You're already there. But what's the additional cost? Well, there is the additional cost. You have to pick up the can, put it in, and that's about it. So we just, as just something that sounded reasonable, we said, let's just count half of those additional carts. So the collection costs are going to be lower because you're already providing the collection service. So that's just something that, and that if somebody has some data or some good rationale for what should be something else than 50%, these are all, they're not set in stone by industry standards. There's no book you go to look up, well, how do we do this? It's really your best estimate of how should these costs be allocated. So in this case, that's what we did with the additional carts. So on the recycling and disposal costs, so those we allocated out based on the tonnage. So how many tons were processed and disposed for just the flat rate customers versus the additional carts? And there's actually data on this stuff. So allocating it out on a weight basis, this one came out 98.2% for the flat rate customers, and additional carts are 1.8%. The organics and the admin costs, so the additional carts in this case for the organics program, since you can't have an additional cart without having an account, you're already being charged for the organics. So we did include the additional carts as getting any of those costs because they're already paying for it. On the overhead costs, you do have to do separate billing. There's administrative overhead. They're kind of like just any other cart. So we included them as on a per account basis or additional carts, the full amount, not the 50%. So the overhead admin cost came out to be 4% for additional carts, 96% for the flat rate carts. And organics was all divided up between the flat rate customers. So once we have the summary of the costs, so the revenue requirements in this top box here, the revenue requirements that's from the functional allocations. And then the allocated costs, so we basically take the percentages in each of those 4 functional allocations times the cost in each of those categories, and came up with the total revenue requirement for both the flat rate and the existing customers. So Over on the right there, you can see flat rate is 98.2% of the total cost, 5,094,000. Additional carts were 92,000, 1.8% total. And then the last part on that general cost of service methodology was you take those costs and divide it by the number of accounts or carts. So the additional carts, there's 957 additional carts, 22,800 for residential customers, flat rate customers. So very simple math, just divide the number by the number of accounts or the carts, and that's your rates. So as you can see, this is pretty simple. It's pretty much A plus B equals C. So what does that look like for projecting the rates? So the first year, the flat rate service would go from $18 to $18.62. And sometimes, just a nuance of this, if you're a numbers person, you're probably going through some of these numbers going, wait a second, that doesn't quite add up. It's not really a case of taking the 9% and just tacking that on to the rates. We could do that, but we would be assuming a lot of things. So what we actually do is we take the number of accounts and all the costs and divide the costs, by the accounts to come up with a rate. Now, so that going from 18 to 1862 is not 9%. And the additional carts actually went down. But when we have the number of accounts and the number of additional carts and so forth in the system, and we know the rates we're going to be recovering from them, it's basically just math. So unless the number of accounts or the number of additional carts are wrong, which we don't think they are, the PILA has guaranteed that, these are the rates. Now after the first year, and that should produce the amount of revenue that we have projected in our financial plans. After that, the assumption is, generally you have what's called a test year. So the test year is where you do all this analysis and you break things down, you pull them apart, and you add them again. You come up with, what's our rates. You don't do that every single year. You don't want us coming back every year doing this again. You don't want to go through another presentation like this next year and every year after. So after that test year, basically the percentage increases are applied across the board. So whatever the rate is, 1862 and 808, those just get the 9% the following year, and the 9% the following year, and then 2 years is 6%. So that's how these projected rates are calculated. Now we factored in, there's some growth happening in your community. I think we assumed 2%? It was 0.5%. 0.5. Okay, 0.5%. So there's some growth happening as you have certain fixed costs, contract costs, and you add more customers. Obviously, it's going to get a little bit cheaper. So all of that stuff has been factored in. Here's how you compare on a regional basis with the surrounding communities. So these are probably the ones you compare your sewer rates to. And your middle to lower area. And the thing that is not easy to do in these is that when you look at 7, 8, 9, 10 different communities, everybody's either in the process or planning to do a rate increase. So this is a static look. We're doing, here's what you are now, and here's what the new rates would be. For these other communities, we don't really know next year what their rates are going to be. So this is what's it's at now. I can guarantee you that in 2 or 3 years, those rates will be different. People will be having, because everybody has to do their organics program for one. And if they're like you guys, it might be 10 or 15 years since they've done a rate increase, and it's like, we just can't do this anymore. So these other rates will be going up. I can pretty much guarantee you that. So, if I wanted to really confuse you, I could go through each of the scenarios for the 3 different financial plans, and then the 2 different variations of the rate design. And we have, let's see, so that's 6 options. So we could have charts with 6 different sets of numbers up here, and pretty soon, you know, half of you would be going, wait a second, you lost me here. We've actually had, not this agency, but other agencies where they've said, no, we want 4 financial plan alternatives and, you know, 3 rate alternatives, and our board wants to see all of those. So we've got 12 different scenarios, and it's like, you know, what do you do? That's what they want. So we brought that, and the board members looked at it and said, you got way too many alternatives here. He said, go back and pare this down to the best 2 or 3 and bring it back to us, which is what we did. But we did consider some of these other alternatives. The other alternative, the rate increase, the option number 1, actually, 13.2% for 2 years and then 3%. That kind of gets you, it solves the deficit problem in 2 years. So those rates actually are obviously going to be higher than they are for the 9%. The kind of weird thing, the way things work out, is that the cumulative under this alternative rate increase is actually less in the 5-year period. It's only like 39-something%. So at the end of 5 years, the rates are actually a little bit lower than they would be under the recommended alternative. So obviously, you know, what's going on there? Well, you know, under the alternative rate increase, you're collecting more money from people up front. So you're kind of fixing the problem earlier, which, you know, mathematically, and if you're ending up at about the same place, the rates end up being a little bit less at the end of 5 years. So it's kind of a trade-off. Do you want to, you know, have bigger rate increases early? And in 5 years, people would be saying, I'm glad we did that. But they will have paid more over that 5-year period, or at least up front in that. But at the end of 5 years, the rates would be a little bit lower than they are under the recommended plan. So those are the kind of things that, you know, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's a subjective thing. You know, what do you prefer? You know, it's very common, as you can imagine, when there are board elections or council elections or whoever's the governing body, often they say, you've got to bring that down to 5% or you're not getting my vote because I have an election year coming up. So those kinds of things, you know, always affect this. But which alternative you want to choose, you know, that's something you guys can weigh in on, and there's no right or wrong answer. Okay. So next steps, I think it's pretty, Scott laid out the plan here, but you're going to provide some input to your board, and you know, the first step would be to give us some feedback tonight. If not tonight, you know, Scott and Adila, you know, in the next couple of weeks. If we need to modify the analysis, do a different alternative or combination alternative or something like that, we can do that. And make adjustments. Whatever results we end up, you know, eventually in that schedule, we're going to bring it to the board. The board's going to weigh in on that and say yes or no. And assuming that they are on board with the proposed recommended rates or something similar, then they will notify staff to send out the Prop 218 protest ballots, notices. As Scott said, assuming you don't get 50% plus 1 protest back, the board is then allowed to adopt the rates. That would be basically, they'd say, okay, we've had a protest period, we've waited 45 days or more, we've counted all the protest ballots, it's not 50% plus 1, so we're going to move to adopt these rates. And that's the process. And then they I think the plan right now is July 1st they would go into effect. So with that, that's some questions written down? Thoughts, comments? Yes, sir.
Question. In regards to the challengers of the rates in the other districts, what were their challenges? What were they saying against increasing the rates?
Well, obviously, it's different by agency. In general, there are groups in the community. I mean, that no tax increase people.
Okay, those.
Whatever you do, all this money is going to staff in rate increase or salary increases. It's that's rarely the case. So it's the typical community feedback. Some people just don't want any rate increases. Other people will say, well, I object to the state forcing us to do an organics program. I'm not saying that's the case here, but that kind of thing can be said. I actually deal more with water and sewer rates, which are a much more lively topic, I guess, a legally challenging topic. And there's a lot of things going on there. Recycled water and ratepayer groups. There's a new report out by the state on subsidizing water rates for low-income customers. A lot of communities have done that for many years. I don't consider you guys to be a low-income community, so it's not an issue here. But yeah, there's just all kinds of reasons why people don't like rate increases. I'd say one of the most common is somebody ran for the board or council or whatever on the basis of I just don't think our rates should go up. And I can't tell you how many times we've come to an agency where they've basically said no rate increases, like over my dead body for the last 10 years, and now everything's falling apart and they don't have any money. And finally they have a board or council that says, this is not the way to run a utility, we're going to fix this. And it's going to include 15-20% rate increases. But that's what you get when you don't raise rates for 15 years. So.
When was the last rate increase for
here?
Yeah.
I think it's 2004. Yeah. Quite a while. And you said there's been a couple of rate decreases?
Rate decreases, correct.
If you remember what years those were?
I want to say it was 2012 and 2014.
Okay. Yeah, and then you can always count on one of the things that we get in RFPs, requests for proposals, is please include the projected cost of future environmental regulatory actions, and we go, how do we know what that's going to be? There's no, the water field, Chrome 6 became a big thing. Basically, we measure things in parts per million, and then all of a sudden they can measure in parts per billion, and all of a sudden, what was fine 10 years ago now is absolutely unacceptable, and you have to spend a lot of money to fix that. So, the organics program it's good. It's going to help us get to, recycling goals, but it does cost money.
I have a couple of basic questions. Maybe Scott would be answering these, but I got confused with the carts going back and forth. My understanding was residential customers get 2 carts, up to 2 carts.
Right.
So the additional is number 3 and 4 carts?
Over 2.
Over 2, okay. And when we were talking about budget, is there a reserve requirement when our reserves drop below that imaginary dark blue line? Is there a reserve requirement that we have to be careful of?
Well, I'll give you my answer, and Scott may have a different answer, but typically that's based on the policy that the district adopts. So unless you had outstanding debt that had reserve requirements and so forth, bond obligations that you had to meet legally, and even in that case, there's districts that they don't meet them and they have to talk to their trustee, and they could get in trouble and they could recall the bonds, but it hardly ever happens. So in terms of legal requirements, it's mostly what policy policy the district sets, and so it's self-regulating. It's are you going to be a financially healthy organization or not, or some places they'll look at that reserve level and they go, I don't understand why we should keep more than $500,000, and that probably would not be a good idea in your case.
Scott, that would go to the board, right?
Yes, and we do have a policy as far as reserves, and I'm trying to look that up in our operations code right now. So here we go. I do have, so the operating reserves, the district will maintain a designated reserve for working capital equal to 30% of its operating budget within solid waste fund. So 30%. So that's we also, like Greg says, we do want to keep a minimum of $2 million in the reserves to pay for our bills, because we only get the property tax installments twice a year, November and April. And so there's all those months we don't get any revenues coming in, or very minimal revenues. And so we have large bills to pay, and that's what those reserves are there for.
So that has to be factored into the budget projection.
Correct.
How has the rate that the district is charged by the hauler, how has that increased and projected to increase over this next 5-year period, as well as the 12 years that you haven't imposed a rate increase?
Well, the hauler CR&R has not had a rate increase since I've been here, since 2010. In their new contract, they are eligible for a CPI increase of February to February, and these proposed rates do factor in a CPI increase. Now, that is based on board approval. So what we're anticipating is a request from CR&R in March saying the CPI from February to February was this, I'm going to say 3%, and then they make that request to the board, and the board has that final say. So we were very clear to put that in the contract. There's not going to be no automatic CPI. The board's going to make that decision. But we did factor in that because CNR has not had a rate increase since I've been here, since 2010.
Has the sanitary district always charged flat rate versus for the actual size of the cart?
Yes. It's always been that's why it could, because it, like Greg said, we just don't feel really confident of our inventory. We just don't have a very, and that's, goes way back when we went to the automated carts back in 2006. We never really kept a really good inventory account.
Has anyone ever complained about that? And the only reason I'm asking, because I'm not a customer, I don't know. But if you look at someone, say for instance, that has a 35-gallon cart, a single, say, senior that has a 35-gallon cart, and they have one small bag of trash every week, versus the next door neighbor who has the 90-gallon, which is almost 3 times the amount of trash, and they fill that, and then they put all their extra trash in the person's can next door, so they don't have to buy a bigger trash can. Well, right? So I'm saying.
I can't imagine anybody would do that.
In terms
I've never done it.
Looking at the percentage of increase, that person with a extremely low amount of consumption already is kind of taking a huge hit if you look at it in those terms. And I don't know that anybody does, but I know, Costa Mesa has a pretty good-sized aging community, and if you're talking about a family of 6 versus a household of 1, and they're being essentially charged the same amount, that seems kind of harsh. Maybe you have to go there.
Yeah, no, we would agree with you. I mean, that's why we looked at the variable rate system, because we believe we believe that solid waste is like a utility, like a water. The more trash you throw away, the more you should spend. You really should pay, right? And so that's right. But it's unfortunately we just didn't have confident in the inventory we have, the inventory of the carts we have. Also, we'd have to update our financial systems, which would cost about $50,000, $60,000, because our financial system keeps track of all the size of the carts. And right now, the way our system is set up, we cannot track the different sizes. And so we contacted our which is Springbrook, and they said it would be another $60,000.
If you gave a break to the person with 35-gallon container versus the guy next door that has the 290 gallons, is CRR going to give you that break, or are they going to just still charge you the same amount?
It'll still be the same amount still the same amount, right? Because the CNR charges us two rates. They charge us the rate to pick up what you call the collection to pay for the drivers to pick up the trash, and then we pay a disposal rate, and that rate's it's what is that? $51 a ton. Doesn't matter, but
they're not going to give you it. We'd be giving that homeowner the break, but we wouldn't be receiving the break.
It's the same reason why when we did the rate decreases. Okay, so we did the rate decrease because we had an excess amount of reserves, and so we were able to afford the rate decrease. Now the homeowners saw that benefit, but we didn't decrease the rates on CNR. Their revenues remained the same.
I'm wondering if you should have done that in retrospect.
Yeah. Vice President Uten.
A little bit of history. In 2012, we did an extensive citizen survey, and that question, the sewerage was one of the survey questions around that issue, and the citizens did believe, and because they're used to it in all of our utility uses, the more you use water, the more you use different things, you get charged on the basis of what you use. And so that's why we have included that in this RFP, was to evaluate that, and we just don't have the means of doing that right now. We also looked at that to try to, when we did a sewer survey, and the consultant recommended that we could not do that because we don't have water rates, and because there's 6 water agencies that are supposed to make it, it's just not possible to do that. But that would be the ethic. If you ask everybody on the street, you go to Sue Lester's house and ask her.
I have a lot of trash, so it wouldn't matter how many people in my house, I always have a lot of trash.
But I mean, so that's why we had the consultant address it in this, and we just.
You get.
So it's a matter of not being able to adjust your financial program on your computer that you can't.
Well, that's one issue, and then the other issue.
You've got 50 or 60 grand in reserves to do it.
True, it's not budget. We could always put it in the budget to do it, but that's one issue.
The assessment deadline?
The what?
Assessment deadline, so we're going to have time to verify and to give residents the time to come and clarify if they have 90 or 60.
Yeah.
There was a time constraint issue.
You want to explain that?
I think the other issue was what the consultant recommended, or what we noted, and that is there's no way to know if you have if there's 3 people on the street, one person has a 35-gallon, 2 35-gallon carts, 2 65-gallon carts, and 2 95-gallon carts. But the 35-gallon cart doesn't fill it up, and the 95 doesn't fill it up. They put the same amount of trash in. We don't know how much trash is in each size cart.
Yeah.
Right.
I've got an old guy in my street. He's like 84, and he's got one of the small trash cans, and he probably doesn't even fill that thing up. And I've got 2 big ones, and I fill everything up. So he's paying the same thing I'm paying. I mean, we should fix that. But that's what I'm saying. If all it is changing the computer program, I mean.
It's more than just the billing system. Assessments, the way we place your charges on the property taxes are due in August. If these rates get adopted in May, it's a time constraint issue. I wouldn't have enough time to let residents know we're switching to a tier rate and to come and contact me to verify that we do have the right size up. The CRNR can tell me you have 2 60s and you actually have 2 90s. It wouldn't give me enough time to contact all the 24,000 houses to put them on the assessments on time. And I don't know that we can go another year with this rate. We would be at even more of a deficit going into fiscal year 2021. So it was not just the billing system, it was also the time constraint. And again, CMSD has never kept track of how many cards are size cards. It's always been the hauler's job. So I would hate to place, Monty, a 90 cart charge on you and you actually have a 35. And now it's on the assessments and now you have to go to the board to get a refund, and that just didn't seem fair. And also the variable, some residents have 190 and other residents have 260, that resident only has 90 gallons when the 260s, even though it's 2 carts, has the capacity of 120 gallons. There is just way too many variables. Or some resident.
Do it. You set a time constraint. We'll stretch it out over a couple of years and get it done. You know. Well, I mean, it seems fair that you're billing.
I think what Nabila was saying is the equity, right? So is it fair to bill someone that has a 90-gallon cart, just one 90-gallon cart, let's say $15 a month, okay? And then someone that has two 60-gallon carts is 120 gallons. So technically that person is disposing more trash than 90-gallon, but I'm going to charge that person less than a person with a 90-gallon cart? You see what I'm saying? It's per household. Per household. Not a cart.
We have a 90 and a bigger one and a small 90 and 60. Is that what they are?
We have those situations too where they have.
We have two different sizes, and then we have the organic one.
And the organic might be a different size. So then, what rate do you apply to those residents?
Yeah. Well, the organic is a separate charge, isn't it?
No.
It's all rates on the one rate. Yep, one rate.
Oh.
So aside from convenience for the customer, what's the reason for the different sizes, the reasoning for the different sizes of the bins?
The 90-gallon carts were grandfathered in when we went into the automation services. So those were when we went to automated. We knew residents did not want to give up their 90-gallon carts, so we said, okay, you can keep those, right? And so they're basically grandfathered in. When anyone gets a new cart, it's a 64-gallon cart. If there's a new resident, it's 64 gallons. So the 90-gallon ones, those are people that have had their carts, and they just don't want to give them up.
I think there's only like, I could be wrong on the number, but there's only like 1,500 90-gallon carts out there, so it's a minimal number.
We got one of them.
And we offer different sizes for space issues. A lot of people don't have the space for that many carts, so they prefer the smaller. All those 3-story condos that are being built, they don't have the space for a 260-gallon cart, so they prefer the 35. Some homes, because they have their garage full or too many things in their garage or they don't have space in their backyard, prefer a smaller cart versus a bigger one. So that's why we offer different sizes.
Okay, because this is the first time I even realized we had different sizes. Because I just had mine switched out to one that's roughly that is exactly the size of the green cart ones, and I just thought everyone was switched out. I didn't realize that there were different. So that's a 60-gallon?
64 gallons. 64 gallons, yeah.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So it's difficult to charge or to provide an incentive to create less waste, but you have a built-in disincentive by the extra cart fee, I don't see that increase being as high, but on the other hand, it's what 2% of the population or 2% of the ratepayers only have the extra cart. I'd like to kind of see them take a bigger hit, but again, it's really only 2% of the ratepayers.
Cart requests, change my cart, I want something bigger, and that happens all the time.
That happens actually often. So also with the new billing system, since CR&R does the cart exchange, it would be hard to keep track and make sure that I'm billing you for the correct size. I wouldn't be able to know in time if you got your cart switched. If it broke and now you have a smaller size.
Does CR&R provide that cart?
Yes. It goes into their system and then they arrange it.
They own it, it's all on them.
We don't pay for the carts. It's strictly their cost, yes, to provide them and deliver them.
And it would just be, the logistics would just be too insane in regards to customer service to just have everyone go one size then, right? It would just be.
Yes, people with the 90-gallon cars, they're not, like I said, they're not going to give them up. They love their 90 gallons. And they give them, switch over to the 64, we'd get a lot of phone calls.
I don't want to give my 90 up.
Thank you. Exactly.
I don't want to give that up. Why should I?
Because you can get 120 or 260s.
I got a 90 and a 60. I'm good.
Every resident should pay the same service charge because, like you said, the truck's got to go there.
Right.
So that charge should absolutely be the same. But in terms of consumption, when you guys are being charged, however much you're being charged per ton to dispose, that's where the variable cost comes in. when you have, you know, this person over here that has nothing, and this person over here that has these huge cans that are stuffing them full. And I would think that if people were charged the difference in the rate, if they had a huge can that they weren't using, they would make a point to make sure to get a smaller one if that's not what they were doing. And I understand that right now you say that you don't have enough time, but it's January, so if you started talking to people about it now, or you can't talk about it until it's actually implemented in May.
In May, late May, it would when they would be adopted. And assessments are due August 10th. So, and it does take a while to compile all that data and transfer it to the county. So again, the time constraint. But the different size, we had this conversation with CRNR. Hopefully, we want to reach 75% diversion by 2020 or 2025. So we were hoping that if seeing the variable in the cost, that more residents were switched to the 35-gallon, or 64 from the 90. But then CRNR brought a valid point that then they would contaminate the organics cart. If they have extra trash and their carts are full, and we know that the truck driver doesn't empty your cart if the lid is open or if it's overfilled, that they would just go place their trash in the organics cart. And right now we have a 96% clean organics cart. It's really no contamination. So do we really want to see our organics cart contaminated?
CRR doesn't have a problem with any sizes.
No, it's a,
They don't care.
no, our residents are really good about putting in clean organics.
Yeah, we're really good about it.
They really are, and it's the clean ratio is 96. It's I've never seen it that high anywhere else. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's great, and so our concern.
To know that people care.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a reflection of that survey we shared with you, because
Yeah.
people. That's why we went to the organics. So that was, we had that really a good conversation with CRNR, and that was their concern, is that people are going to start contaminating the organics or putting their trash in other people's trash. It could create a little bit of a mess.
You know, in kind of a weird way, it probably doesn't make any difference for this conversation, but it would almost seem to CRNR that the 90 versus the 35, okay, the CRNR takes that 35-gallon worth of waste, separates it, isn't getting any, and then sells what they can out of it. The 90, there's a whole lot more in there that they're going to take apart and sell. So they're actually probably making more money off the 90 than they are off the 35.
That's true.
Yeah.
You know, they
Yeah,
build it
right,
up, and maybe
right.
that can keep the rate down a little bit.
Right. And those are taken into considerations when we're negotiating with CRNR, is that the revenues they receive on the recyclables, granted the recycle market's kind of in a flux right now because of China, but that's they're supposed to use the revenues to offset those costs to provide that service.
The bigger cans are actually keeping the rate down.
Yes.
The bigger cars. We'll throw more stuff away and they make more money.
Dish out more big cans.
So can you repeat your reasoning behind your proposed rate for the 9%, 9%, 9%, 6.6?
Yeah, so if you have an annual deficit now, and originally we thought, let's fix that deficit 2 years. So we came up, what is that number? That's 13.26 or 2.
Right, for 2 years.
For 2 years, and then 3% after that. Given that, well, we have adequate reserves, we don't have to do it in 2 years. What would it look like if we did it in 5 years? So we did, just kind of keep round numbers, 9.9966%. And then if we just wanted to pick one number that was good for the 5 years, got you to the same point in terms of reserves, that's 8.36.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So do you guys want some other things to think about from the monkey wrench in the works? Because we, I'll just let you do it. So one of the things we looked at here, because we're very familiar with Prop 218 and all that's going on, the legal challenges, we actually asked the question, are you potentially overly challenged because you're not charging per cart? And I don't mean per customer, like, you have 1 or 2, 90 or 65 or 35 gallon. I mean each cart. So forget about the additional cart. That's just another cart. each 90 gallon costs X, and each 65 costs this much. So if you have two 90 gallons or two 65 gallons, your charges are based on how many carts you have and how big they are. Because that would be the most cost service based, most fair and equitable. So, and the reason I ask these kind of questions is because based on the lawsuits that have been happening over Prop 218, there are new equity requirements that, before it's like, just, it's up to you. You choose what you want, what you think is fair, and all of a sudden anybody can challenge that. So we actually went to the legal counsel for the district, and they gave an opinion that no, we don't think you're going to be required to do it on a per cart basis. Forget, just like throw out the accounts. You have an account, but your charges are going to, there's going to be a rate sheet. If you got 190 and 160 or 165 and 135, whatever combination you have, that's how your rates are going to be set. Obviously, that would be extremely complicated compared to what you have now for Navila. But those are the kind of things, we kind of thought about, like, is this really how things should happen? And so I would say, I think there are always going to be people that game the system, like the people that get the lowest cart size, and then they cramp, they just get 65 or 90 gallons worth of stuff in there, or put it in their neighbors. I mean, there's always going to be that. So getting some good data on average, let's say you just went out and did a survey and said, okay, we're going to do it every other month, we're going to take a sample. What was the average weight in the 35-gallon container? 65, 90, two 90s versus 190, two 65s versus one, get all that data so you have some actual numbers so you know how much people are actually disposing. You mentioned that the collection costs are, going to be the same for everybody. Well, actually, they're kind of not. If you, let's say you have a neighborhood where they all have two 90-gallon and they fill them up every week, and then you've got another community, and this doesn't actually exist, but another community where everybody's a senior and they only have 35 gallons. They put like the one trash bag in per week. The collection vehicle would kind of go forever, picking up the 35-gallon carts until he had to leave and go dump. At the 290s, he'd be going back and forth all day long, and their collection cost obviously would be higher. So those are the kind of things that kind of have to factor in. Nothing's perfect. We don't have perfect data. You're never going to stop people from gaming the system on the what they tell you they want for carts. So it's kind of just like what's the best option.
I think we need to wrap up this conversation soon. Maybe we'll take one more question. We have a personal goal to wrap up these meetings by 7:30, so maybe we can entertain one or two.
This is a new subject, Prop 218. At 50% plus one, is that 50% of the ballots that are returned?
No.
50% of the ballots that are sent out.
Right. So Prop 218 legally, technically, is based on parcels or property owners, parcels. So every customer who has a parcel as a property owner would technically get one vote. Typically, what all agencies do now is if you have renters, so you have a property owner and you have a renter. The renter would say, "Where's my protest ballot?" So they just start sending them to those people. If it got down to like, hey, we're right around that cutoff mark. Legally, if there was a challenge of the number of ballots, they could only count the one for the ballot. But it, like the chance of getting that many back is very, very small. So,
thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we'll be hearing this again at our next meeting. The next item on our agenda is just a report of the 75th anniversary ad hoc committee. We met on December 21st, just before the holidays. That was with Director Perry and Director Arlene Schaefer. We discussed the new logo for the 75th anniversary. There was a logo contest. I don't know if we've gone any further since then, but it was a very neat exercise to see the different logos that were presented to the district. I don't. Okay. In addition, we discussed various events and promotional activities to go throughout the year of the district's 75th anniversary. We were talking about a mulch giveaway and donation event early in the spring, possibly to coincide with OCC's spring plant sale to give residents an opportunity to get free mulch. The Citizens Environmental Protection Academy, which I think many of you have gone through. Those were some of the other things. Participating in the fish fry, the concerts in the park. Logos on the side of CR&R's trucks promoting the district's 75th anniversary. I think that was the winner, or the popular vote of the district's 75th anniversary logo. It's pretty similar, or moderately similar to the 70th, right?
Who drew that?
So this was a contest that was promoted out through, what's the name of the?
Logo Sauce?
Logo
It's a
Sauce.
website.
So so refresh my memory. It was sent out to people that could create logos, and then the winner gets
Yes, it's
awarded.
a website where it's a competition, and graphic designers can enter these competitions and create logos. So we had a reward of $500 for the winning design. So we were guaranteed, I believe, 60 entries, and I believe we had a little more than that. So the ad hoc committee had a chance to review all the logo entries, and that was the winning logo.
Yeah, there was. We don't have those as handouts, but there were dozens of entries for the logo contest. But I think everyone agreed that that was pretty popular, or spoke to the district's needs. We will be meeting again in 2 weeks from today, the ad hoc committee. 2 weeks from today, yes. So next meeting we'll update you some more. I want to get to the last item of the agenda because this is one that we tabled from last time. We were talking about adjusting the frequency of our meetings from monthly to, there was a recommendation for quarterly, and I think we were talking about possibly doing it maybe every other month as a compromise. I'd like to kind of further that conversation here and hopefully come up with some direction to give to the staff and board. After having a month to think about it, does anybody have strong feelings one way or the other? Like to validate your points from last month?
I still like the every other month plan, but I know that there's new bodies here that weren't a part of the conversation the last time, and if they have any input, that'll be great.
Every other month suits me too.
Every other month.
I'd just like to comment, I think every other month would be best, but we seem to still be meeting monthly and running up on the hour and a half. So how are we going to transition and still deal with the same amount of material in a concise amount of time?
Well,
or some of it educational, and maybe that we read on our own time.
Right. I'd like to make that suggestion too. Maybe do a little more preparation leading up to the meetings, and then I can keep a tighter rein on the timing of the meetings. Sue, did you have it, or did anybody else have any other opinions, one way or the other, of meeting frequency?
Every other month.
Every other month.
Yeah. But I think then, we'll need to manage the kind of agenda to set time, like plan times, right, to make sure we get through those. Otherwise, there's a 2-month.
A 2-month gap, and then we have to table something, come back 2 months. So I mean, if we go with every other month and it doesn't seem to work, there's really no reason that we couldn't switch back at a future time, right? So do we have a motion to, it sounds like the general consensus so far is every other month. I haven't heard any arguments necessarily supporting other than your basic concern of timing.
We're an advisory board to the board of directors. So if we're meeting every other month and we have to table something to the next meeting, that's 4 months they're waiting for a recommendation. And sometimes I think they're required to have a community recommendation, other times they're not. So is that an issue?
It'll be 2 months, right? The maximum stretch amount of time for them to ask us for any type of recommendations. I would think it would be 2 months.
So our meetings are currently on the second Wednesday. Board meetings are the fourth Thursday.
So if they had let's just say in this scenario, we met today, they have a meeting and they have a motion, the next time we would meet would be in March. So it would be 2 months, not 4.
Right.
I see what you're saying.
Correct. Any other comments, concerns, or do we have a motion?
Really important, we could always shove an extra meeting in that, I mean, if necessary, I wouldn't think that would be that big a deal. If we had to come to a conclusion, then we just have
If there was a pressing
emergency
issue.
meeting. Period.
Hey, Mike, can I make a comment? With the new rate schedule, I prefer you guys meeting every month until we get the rates established to give us better feedback, because we're going to have to make a decision in May.
Right. You do,
So, I mean, I'm just thinking if you guys meet monthly, right? If you could do it for the next couple months.
The next meeting in March 13th will be the study session. I'm sorry, the next meeting in March will be the review of the solid waste rates with the recommendations. So they're not going to be, it wouldn't, if they had a meeting in February, they won't be discussing the rates at all in February. It won't be till March.
How come? Can't they talk about the rates in February?
It's because the way we had it set up, the way we had the schedule was that we're having our first town hall meeting into January, and then we were going to present it to the board for the first time in February. So the board will see the rates for the first time in February, and then we'll take the comments from the board and from the town hall meeting to the CAC in March.
Okay, that sounds good. I want to make sure we get your feedback, before we make any decisions.
sounds like we'd still be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. We can still do that, yes.
So a motion, we go every other month.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion carries every other month. Nice work. Okay. Then final item. We'll get out of here on time then. Committee member comments. Does anybody have any additional comments?
I had 2 things.
Great.
I wanted to thank the district for that lovely holiday dinner. It was a lot
welcome.
of fun, and
You're welcome.
really appreciate being
I'm glad you were
included.
there. Glad you can be here.
And then I saw a news article in the LA Times about a report from Best and Krieger.
Yes, we gave you a copy.
Okay.
You have a copy of that report with you, right? So all the committee members have a copy of
At the
that story.
bottom.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Is it possible to get a copy of that report, or just there were a couple of quotes that were a little? It just seemed like something we should be a little more briefed on, maybe.
It is a public document under the advice of our attorneys. The attorneys recommending that a public records request be made. However, if you want to just come in the HQ, if you have some free time to review it, we can do that too.
Okay.
You can just can't take any pictures or copies of it, but I can, if you just want to read it and come to the HQ, we can do that. If you want an actual document, under advice of our legal counsel, just submit a public records request and we can do that.
Okay. It said that there was a quote that we're pleased with the findings that there was no fraud or embezzlement that occurred.
Mhm.
Yes, definitely. You're quoted as saying the report did identify some things we can do better, so we're going to do that. Have those been identified as to what's?
Yes, and we'll be presenting that to the board in February, and that's bringing our inspections in-house. Rob Hamers has a different opinion, so he wants to bring his opinion to the board, so there'll be that discussion with the board on the study session in February.
In February, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, and I'd like to encourage, again, just to reiterate, encourage participation of our members to attend some of the board meetings. I'll make a commitment to attend the next one. Are there any other comments?
Just personally, I serve on several advisory committees for schools around the state, and Thursday night is a favorite night for advisory meetings. And starting at the end of the month, I'm back to teaching Thursday nights, Tuesdays and Thursday nights. So I apologize on not being able to make a board meeting.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments? Great. Hearing none, we will adjourn this meeting at 7:28. Look at that. Nice work. Thank you, everybody.